The roar of wind muffled Kathleen Collins' desperate scream as she clung to the cellar door, watching helplessly as the monstrous funnel cloud devoured her family's homestead like some ravenous beast from hell. It was May 15, 1875, and in 30 terrifying seconds, everything she had worked for over the past 3 years was gone. The tornado had appeared without warning on the Texas horizon, a writhing black serpent against the dusky sky. Kathleen had barely managed to secure herself in the root cellar before the twister descended upon her small ranch outside Johnson City. Now, as silence settled over the ravaged land, she emerged from her shelter to face devastation so complete it stole her breath. Her modest home, the one she'd built with her late husband Thomas, before consumption claimed him last winter, was reduced to splinters. The barn that had housed her 2 horses and milk cow was simply gone, vanished as if it had never existed. Debris that had once been furniture, clothing, and precious keepsakes lay scattered across acres of ruined farmland. Even the vegetable garden she depended on for survival was destroyed, the soil torn up and mixed with the wreckage of her life. Kathleen sank to her knees in the mud, her calico dress already soaked from the rain that had followed the tornado's destruction. At 26, she was alone in the world. No family, no home, no livelihood. Only the land remained, and without means to work it, even that seemed worthless now. "Lord Almighty," she whispered, her fingers digging into the earth. "What am I to do now?" As the sun set on what remained of her homestead, Kathleen made her way to the splintered remains of her chicken coop. By some miracle, 3 of her hens had survived, huddled together beneath a section of roof that had collapsed in such a way as to create a small shelter. It wasn't much, but it was something, a tiny spark of hope in the darkness that threatened to engulf her. She spent that first night curled up in the root cellar, listening to the occasional sounds of debris shifting in the gentle breeze that had replaced the killing winds. Sleep came in fitful bursts, her dreams filled with the roar of the tornado and the cracking of timber. Morning brought the harsh reality of daylight to her ruined property, but it also brought something unexpected: a rider approaching from the east, his tall silhouette stark against the rising sun. Kathleen scrambled to her feet, painfully aware of her bedraggled appearance. She hadn't survived 3 years on the frontier by being careless around strangers, especially men. Her late husband's rifle had been lost in the storm, but she gripped a sturdy piece of wood in her hands, ready to defend herself if necessary. The rider slowed his chestnut gelding as he approached what had once been her front gate. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the morning sun. A respectable-looking buckskin coat covered his frame, and though he wore a holstered Colt at his hip, there was nothing particularly threatening about his appearance. "Hello, the house," he called out, though there was no house to speak of anymore. "Anyone alive out here?" "I'm alive," Kathleen replied, stepping out from behind a pile of debris, still clutching her makeshift weapon. "What business do you have here?" The man removed his hat, revealing a shock of dark brown hair and a face weathered by sun and wind but not unkind. His eyes, a striking blue, widened slightly at the sight of her standing amid the destruction. "Isaiah Everett, madam," he said, inclining his head respectfully. "I was riding back to my ranch when I spotted the damage. Thought I might see if anyone needed help." "Kathleen Collins," she replied cautiously. "As you can see, Mr. Everett, help is precisely what I need, though I doubt there's much to be done now." Isaiah Everett dismounted, tying his horse to a fence post that had somehow remained upright. He surveyed the devastation with a practiced eye. "Was anyone else with you when the twister hit?" he asked. Kathleen shook her head. "Just me. My husband passed last winter." A look of understanding crossed his face. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Collins." "Miss Collins now, I suppose," she corrected him, her voice cracking slightly. "Or just Kathleen. Formalities seem rather pointless when everything I own is scattered across 3 counties. Isaiah's gaze swept over the property once more. "You can't stay here, not like this," he said matter-of-factly. "My ranch is about 5 miles east." "You're welcome to shelter there until we can sort something out." Suspicion flared in Kathleen's chest. "That's very kind, Mr. Everett, but I don't know you, and I've no intention of abandoning my land." He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "No offense meant, Miss Collins. I understand your reluctance, but at least let me bring you some supplies. Food, clean water, tools, maybe round up any livestock that might have survived." She hesitated, pride warring with practicality. The few coins she had saved were buried in a tin beneath the floorboards of what had once been her bedroom. If she could find them, perhaps she could afford a room in Johnson City while she decided what to do next. But the thought of leaving, of giving up the land she and Thomas had worked so hard for, made her stomach clench. "I appreciate the offer of supplies," she said finally, "but I'll be staying right here." Isaiah nodded, his expression unreadable. "As you wish. I'll return by noon with what I can gather." He replaced his hat, tipped it slightly in her direction, and mounted his horse. As he turned to leave, he added, "The tornado hit several homesteads east of here. I'll spread word in town about what happened. The folks in Johnson City look after their own, Miss Collins." Kathleen watched him ride away, uncertainty gnawing at her. She had always prided herself on self-sufficiency, but as she turned back to the ruins of her home, she wondered if pride might be a luxury she could no longer afford. True to his word, Isaiah returned just before midday with a wagon loaded with supplies. He'd brought basic foodstuffs, clean water, blankets, a small tent, and even some tools. More surprisingly, tied to the back of the wagon was her milk cow, Bessie, who looked utterly unperturbed by her adventure. "Found her about 2 miles south," Isaiah explained as he unhitched the placid animal. "No sign of your horses, I'm afraid, but I'll keep looking." Kathleen felt tears spring to her eyes at the sight of the familiar bovine. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never expected to see her again." While Isaiah unloaded the supplies, Kathleen searched through the rubble for anything salvageable. She managed to find her cast iron skillet, miraculously intact, and a few pieces of clothing that could be washed and mended. Most precious of all, she uncovered the small tin box containing her meager savings and the gold wedding band Thomas had placed on her finger. As the day progressed, 2 more wagons arrived from town. The Methodist minister, Reverend Parker, brought additional supplies and news that the church would be taking up a collection on Sunday to help those affected by the tornado. Behind him came the Miller family from the neighboring farm, who had been spared the worst of the storm's wrath. By evening, Kathleen had a small tent erected near her root cellar, a fire burning cheerfully, and the beginning of a plan forming in her mind. She would rebuild somehow. She had to. Isaiah stayed well past sunset, helping to clear some of the heaviest debris and setting up a makeshift pen for Bessie. As he prepared to leave, he paused by his horse. "I'll be back tomorrow with more help," he said. "Johnson City's sending a group to assist those hit by the storm." Kathleen nodded, exhaustion evident in her posture. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Everett? You don't know me." Isaiah adjusted his hat, considering her question. "My pa always said a man's character is judged by what he does when no one's watching, and how he treats those who can offer him nothing in return." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I've been where you are, lost everything once myself. Someone helped me back then. Seems only right to pass that kindness along." With those words, he mounted up and rode off into the gathering darkness, leaving Kathleen to ponder their meaning as she huddled in her tent, listening to the night sounds of the Texas prairie. The next morning dawned clear and warm, typical for late spring in the Texas hill country. Kathleen awoke before sunrise, her body stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. She tended to Bessie, grateful for the small comfort of routine in a world turned upside down. True to his word, Isaiah returned mid-morning with 3 wagons and half a dozen men from Johnson City. Among them was Mayor Harold Jenkins, a round-faced man with a booming voice who declared it a civic duty to assist a lady in distress. The men set to work clearing debris, salvaging usable lumber, and marking out the foundation where Kathleen's home had once stood. Isaiah took charge naturally, directing the efforts with quiet efficiency. During a brief rest, he approached Kathleen as she sorted through what remained of her possessions. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. Your land borders the eastern edge of my property. I never realized we were neighbors of sorts. Kathleen looked up in surprise. Your ranch must be quite large, Mr. Everett. A fleeting expression of discomfort crossed his face. It's modest by Texas standards, just over 1,000 acres. Modest was hardly the word Kathleen would have used to describe such a holding. Her own property consisted of a mere 100 acres, considered a respectable homestead, but nothing compared to the ranch Isaiah described. What I mean to say, he continued, is that I have resources that could help you rebuild. Timber from my land, additional hands to assist with construction. If you're amenable, of course. Kathleen regarded him suspiciously. And what would you want in return, Mr. Everett? His blue eyes widened slightly. Nothing, Miss Collins. Consider it neighborly assistance. In my experience, she replied carefully, men rarely offer something for nothing. Especially to women alone. Isaiah's expression sobered. Your caution is warranted given your circumstances, but I assure you, my offer comes with no expectations beyond allowing me to help someone in need. Before Kathleen could respond, Mayor Jenkins called Isaiah away to consult on the best approach to clearing a particularly large section of debris. She watched him go, uncertain what to make of his generosity. As the day progressed, more townspeople arrived with food and additional supplies. The women of Johnson City's Ladies' Aid Society had organized a meal for the workers, and Kathleen found herself surrounded by friendly faces offering comfort and practical assistance. It was a stark reminder of the community she had gradually withdrawn from after Thomas's death. By late afternoon, the property looked considerably less chaotic. The foundation area had been cleared, usable materials sorted into piles, and a rough plan sketched out for a new, small cabin that could be constructed quickly to provide immediate shelter. As the workers prepared to depart for the day, Isaiah approached Kathleen once more. I've spoken with the men, and we believe we can have a simple structure built within a week, weather permitting. It won't be fancy, but it'll keep you dry and safe until a proper home can be constructed. Kathleen felt overwhelmed by the generosity being shown to her. I don't know how I'll ever repay everyone, she admitted. No one's expecting repayment, Isaiah assured her. This is what communities do, Miss Collins. We help each other through the hard times. That night, alone in her tent, Kathleen allowed herself to cry properly for the first time since the tornado. She wept for her lost home, for the keepsakes of Thomas that had been destroyed, and for the years of work that had been undone in moments. But mixed with her grief was a small seed of hope, planted by the kindness of strangers and neighbors alike. The following days fell into a pattern. Workers arrived early, labored through the day, and departed at dusk. Isaiah was a constant presence, often arriving before anyone else and staying long after the others had gone. Kathleen noticed that he preferred to work with his hands rather than direct others, seemingly more comfortable with physical labor than with giving orders. On the third day, as they shared a simple lunch of cornbread and beans provided by the Ladies' Aid Society, Kathleen's curiosity got the better of her. How did you come to own such a large ranch, Mr. Everett? She asked. You seem young for such an establishment. Isaiah hesitated, breaking off a piece of cornbread. I'm 32, Miss Collins, not so young by frontier standards. Even so, she persisted. He sighed, his blue eyes focusing on something in the distance. The ranch belonged to my uncle. He had no children, and I was his only nephew. I came to Texas after the war looking for a fresh start. Worked for him for 5 years before he passed, left everything to me. You fought in the war? Kathleen asked, noting the way his expression had tightened at the mention. Yes, he said simply, offering no further details. After a moment, he added, You mentioned your husband passed last winter. I'm sorry for your loss. Kathleen accepted the change of subject. Thomas caught consumption late last fall. By Christmas, he was bedridden. He died in February. She twisted the wedding band she still wore. We were married just 4 years. No children, she shook her head. We had hoped, but it wasn't to be. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Isaiah spoke again. If you don't mind my asking, what will you do once we get the cabin built? This land needs working, and farming alone is a hard life. It was a question Kathleen had been pondering herself. I don't know, she admitted. Before the tornado, I was managing. The vegetable garden provided most of what I needed, and I sold eggs and milk in town for other necessities. But now, she gestured at the devastated fields. It will be months before I can grow anything again. Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. I could use help at my ranch, he said carefully. Nothing improper. I need someone to manage the household, cook for the hands. The pay would be fair, and you could return to your land each evening or stay in the ranch house if the weather's poor. Kathleen bristled slightly. I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Everett, and I'm not offering any, he countered. I've been without a housekeeper since Mrs. Gonzalez returned to her family in San Antonio 3 months ago. The men are tired of my cooking, and frankly, so am I. It's honest work I'm offering, nothing more. She considered his proposal. The idea of earning steady wages was appealing, especially given her current circumstances. And yet, accepting felt somehow like admitting defeat, acknowledging that she couldn't maintain the independent life she'd fought so hard to build. I'll think about it, she said finally. Thank you for the offer. By the end of the week, the simple cabin was taking shape. It was smaller than her original home, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, but it would provide adequate shelter. The men had even managed to construct a small lean-to for Bessie and the chickens. On Sunday, Kathleen attended services at the Methodist Church in Johnson City for the first time since Thomas's funeral. She was touched by the warm reception she received and the generous collection taken up on behalf of storm victims. Reverend Parker announced that the tornado had claimed 2 lives on farms east of town, but said that most families had survived with injuries ranging from minor to serious. After the service, Kathleen found herself surrounded by well-wishers offering additional help. Mary Beth Wilson, the town's seamstress, promised a package of fabric and clothing to replace what had been lost. Samuel Harris, who owned the general store, offered credit until Kathleen could get back on her feet. As she prepared to return to her property in a wagon borrowed from the Millers, Isaiah approached, dressed in his Sunday best, a dark wool suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to respectable businessman. May I escort you back to your homestead? He asked formally, aware of the curious glances they were receiving. Kathleen hesitated only briefly before nodding. The community's opinion mattered in a place like Johnson City, and being seen with a respected rancher like Isaiah would help quiet any potential gossip about a woman living alone. As they traveled the dusty road toward her property, Kathleen found herself studying Isaiah's profile. He was undeniably handsome in a weathered way, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though she had seen little evidence of it in their interactions thus far. Have you considered my offer? He asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Kathleen smoothed her skirts, buying time to organize her thoughts. I have, she admitted, and I'm inclined to accept with certain conditions. Isaiah raised an eyebrow, such as? I would return to my land each evening, weather permitting, she stated firmly. I need to tend to Bessie and my chickens, and I want to continue working on restoring my garden when I can, he nodded. That's reasonable. And I would expect to be treated with respect by you and your men. No improper behavior or suggestions. Isaiah's expression grew serious. Of course, Miss Collins, I run a respectable establishment. My hands know better than to step out of line, especially with a lady. Then we have an agreement, Kathleen said, extending her hand as she would in any business arrangement. Isaiah seemed momentarily taken aback by the gesture but quickly recovered, clasping her hand in his much larger one. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, but his grip was gentle. When can you start? He asked. Once the cabin is habitable, she replied. I believe that will be within the next few days. They completed the journey in companionable conversation, with Isaiah pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. By the time they reached Kathleen's property, she found herself looking forward to seeing the ranch that had occupied so much of their discussion. The next 3 days saw the completion of the small cabin. It was sturdy if plain, with a packed earth floor, simple wooden walls, and a shingled roof that would keep out the rain. The men had even constructed a rough table and bench, and someone had donated a straw-filled mattress that now sat on a rope bed frame in the corner. On the fourth day after their agreement, Isaiah arrived alone just after sunrise. "I thought I might show you the ranch today," he explained. "Give you a chance to see where you'll be working before you start." Kathleen had just finished milking Bessie and was pleased with the prospect of seeing more of her new employer's property. She quickly changed into her second-best dress, a faded blue calico that had somehow survived the storm with only minor damage, and secured her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Isaiah waited patiently, holding the reins of his chestnut gelding and a smaller bay mare that Kathleen didn't recognize. "She's yours for the duration of your employment," he explained when he noticed her questioning look. "You'll need reliable transportation between the properties." Kathleen approached the mare cautiously. "She's beautiful," she said, stroking the animal's velvety nose. "What's her name?" "Daisy," Isaiah replied with a small smile. "She's gentle, good for a lady's riding." With Isaiah's assistance, Kathleen mounted the mare, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible given the circumstances. It had been some time since she'd ridden, but the familiar feel of a horse beneath her was comforting. They set off at a leisurely pace, heading east toward Isaiah's ranch. The late May morning was pleasant, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and sun-warmed earth. As they rode, Isaiah pointed out features of the landscape and shared stories of his early days in Texas. "It wasn't easy at first," he admitted. "I came here with nothing but the clothes on my back and a determination to leave the war behind me. My uncle was reluctant to take me in. He and my father had quarreled years before, but he needed help, and I needed work." "Where was home before Texas?" Kathleen asked. "Virginia," Isaiah replied, his expression growing distant. "Beautiful country, but too full of ghosts after the war." Kathleen understood that feeling all too well. She had left her family home in Missouri after her parents died of influenza, unable to bear the silence of rooms once filled with their voices. She had met Thomas at a church social in St. Louis while staying with a distant aunt, and his dreams of Texas had seemed like the perfect escape. "There it is," Isaiah said, interrupting her thoughts. They had crested a small rise, and below them stretched a verdant valley. Nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills was a collection of buildings that comprised the Everett Ranch. The main house was larger than Kathleen had expected, a two-story structure built of limestone with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Several outbuildings surrounded it, including a substantial barn, a bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a cookhouse. In nearby corrals, horses grazed contentedly, while in the distance she could see cattle dotting the landscape. "It's impressive," she said honestly. Isaiah shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with the praise. "It serves its purpose. The main house is larger than I need, but my uncle built it with the intention of filling it with family." They rode down to the ranch at a comfortable pace. As they approached the main house, several men emerged from the various buildings, curious about the visitor. Kathleen felt suddenly self-conscious under their appraising gazes. Isaiah dismounted quickly and moved to help her down from Daisy. His hands were strong and steady at her waist, lifting her effortlessly to the ground. He kept the contact brief, stepping back respectfully once she was steady. "Mrs. Collins will be joining us as housekeeper," he announced to the gathered men. "I expect her to be treated with the utmost respect at all times." There were nods all around, accompanied by removed hats and mumbled greetings. Kathleen counted 7 men in total, ranging in age from what appeared to be a boy of no more than 17 to a grizzled older man with a magnificent white beard. "This is Hank," Isaiah said, indicating the older man. "He's my foreman and has been with the ranch since before my time." Hank stepped forward, his weathered face creasing in a friendly smile. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Collins. Boss tells us you had a rough time with that twister." "Miss Collins," she corrected gently. "And yes, though I've been fortunate to have such kind neighbors." "Thank the Lord you're here, Miss Collins," Caleb said fervently. "These men have been suffering my cooking for too long. Any change will be welcomed as manna from heaven." This elicited chuckles from the group, and Kathleen found herself smiling in response. The atmosphere was more relaxed than she had expected, with an easy camaraderie evident among the men. Isaiah showed her around the property, beginning with the main house. The interior was sparsely furnished but clean, with a large kitchen that would be her primary domain. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, though Isaiah explained that he was the only one who slept in the main house. The Hands had their quarters in the bunkhouse, while Hank had a small cabin of his own near the barn. "My quarters are at the end of the hall," Isaiah said as they completed the tour of the 2nd floor. "You needn't concern yourself with cleaning them. I manage well enough on my own." Kathleen appreciated the consideration behind this arrangement. It would avoid any potential impropriety or awkwardness. After the house tour, they visited the cookhouse, a separate building where the ranch hands took their meals. It was a simple structure with a large cookstove, a substantial table with benches, and storage for foodstuffs. "This is where you'll prepare meals for the men," Isaiah explained. "Breakfast at sunrise, dinner at noon, supper at sunset. Caleb will assist you until you're comfortable with the routine." By the time they had completed the tour, the sun was high overhead. Isaiah suggested they take dinner with the men so Kathleen could observe the typical mealtime routine. She agreed, curious to see how the ranch operated. Dinner was a lively affair, with the men sharing stories and good-natured ribbing. Kathleen noted that Isaiah ate with his hands rather than apart, indicating a lack of pretension that she found admirable. The food was simple but plentiful: beans, cornbread, and salt pork, with coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. As the meal concluded, Isaiah announced that Kathleen would begin her duties the following Monday, giving her a few more days to settle into her new cabin. The men expressed their enthusiasm for the arrangement, with Caleb dramatically declaring his relief at being freed from cooking duties. On the ride back to her property, Kathleen found herself viewing the arrangement with growing optimism. The work would be demanding but straightforward, the pay would allow her to rebuild her life, and the men seemed respectful and kind. "What did you think?" Isaiah asked as they approached her cabin. "I think it will suit me well," she replied honestly. "Thank you for the opportunity." He smiled, and for the first time Kathleen noticed a dimple in his right cheek. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Collins. I have a feeling you'll bring some much-needed civility to our rough establishment." The weekend passed quickly as Kathleen prepared for her new position. On Saturday, she visited Johnson City to purchase a few necessities with some of the money from the church collection. Mary Beth Wilson had made good on her promise, providing 2 serviceable work dresses and a nicer one for Sundays. By Monday morning, Kathleen was ready. She fed her chickens and milked Bessie before dawn, storing the milk in the cool darkness of the root cellar for her return that evening. Dressed in one of her new work dresses, a practical brown cotton with white trim, she mounted Daisy just as the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern horizon. The ride to the Everett ranch was pleasant in the early morning light. Kathleen found herself appreciating the beauty of the Texas landscape, from the gently rolling hills to the expanses of open prairie dotted with bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. Isaiah was waiting on the porch when she arrived, a cup of coffee in hand. He wore his customary work clothes denims, a faded shirt with the sleeves rolled up and well-worn boots. "Good morning, Miss Collins," he greeted her. "Ready for your first day?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied with more confidence than she felt. The day was busy but satisfying. With Caleb's guidance, Kathleen prepared breakfast for the men: flapjacks, bacon, and more of the strong coffee they seemed to favor. After breakfast, she turned her attention to the main house, sweeping floors, dusting furniture, and taking inventory of what supplies would be needed for the coming weeks. By midday, she had a hearty stew simmering for dinner, made with beef from the ranch and vegetables from the kitchen garden behind the cookhouse. The men returned from their morning work with hearty appetites and appreciation for the improvement in their fare. "If the boss doesn't give you a raise after this meal, Miss Collins, we might just have to stage a revolt," Jeremiah declared, earning laughter from the others and a wry smile from Isaiah. The afternoon passed in a similar fashion, with Kathleen settling into the rhythm of ranch life. By the time she prepared to leave for her cabin, she was tired but satisfied with her day's work. Isaiah insisted on accompanying her home, despite her protests that she knew the way. "It's not a matter of directions," he explained as they rode. "It's a matter of propriety and safety. These hills can be dangerous for a lone rider, especially as evening approaches." Kathleen couldn't argue with his logic, though she suspected his concern was more gentlemanly than practical. The ride back was companionable, with Isaiah sharing news of the day's ranch activities, and Kathleen describing her plans for improving the main house's organization. As they approached her cabin, the setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light, transforming the simple structure into something almost beautiful. A surge of gratitude swept through Kathleen as she realized how far she had come in such a short time since the tornado's destruction. "Thank you again for everything you've done," she said softly as Isaiah helped her dismount. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, something unreadable in his blue eyes. "You're welcome, Miss Collins. I'll return at sunrise tomorrow." The pattern was established. Each morning, Isaiah would be waiting when she arrived at the ranch. Throughout the day, their paths would cross as they went about their respective duties. And each evening, he would escort her home, regardless of weather or his own fatigue. As weeks passed, Kathleen's presence transformed the Everett ranch. The main house took on a warmer atmosphere with small touches wildflowers in mason jars on the dining table, curtains she sewed for the windows from fabric purchased in town, more varied and flavorful meals for the men. Isaiah commented more than once that the place hadn't felt so much like a home since his uncle's day. June gave way to July, bringing scorching temperatures typical of Texas summers. Kathleen's garden at her own property began to recover, with young plants emerging from the carefully tended soil. On her days off, she focused on continuing improvements to her cabin, adding a small front porch with Isaiah's help and a proper stone path to the well. It was during one such day in mid-July, as they worked together to construct a chicken coop more substantial than the temporary shelter the birds had been using, that Kathleen first noticed a change in her feelings toward Isaiah. He had removed his shirt in the heat, revealing a torso muscled from years of ranch work, but also marked with several scars that could only have come from battle. As he worked, concentrating on securing the frame of the coop, Kathleen found herself studying his profile, appreciating the strength in his hands and the kindness that consistently informed his actions. When he caught her watching, she quickly looked away, a blush heating her cheeks. But the moment lingered in her mind long after he had donned his shirt and departed for his own property. That night, Kathleen lay awake in her small cabin, troubled by her growing attraction to Isaiah. Thomas had been gone barely 6 months. Was it disloyal to feel this way about another man so soon? And even if it wasn't, what could come of it? Isaiah was her employer, a man of means and property, while she was a widow with nothing but a partially rebuilt homestead and a reputation for independence that might not appeal to a potential husband. These thoughts plagued her in the coming days, making her slightly withdrawn in Isaiah's presence. He noticed the change. Of course he was observant, particularly when it came to her, but he respected her enough not to pry. Instead, he found other ways to show his concern. One evening in late July, he arrived at the ranch house with a package wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you," he said, extending it toward her with an almost shy expression. Kathleen accepted it curiously. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," he replied. "Just something I thought you might enjoy." Inside the package was a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson, published just a few years earlier. Kathleen ran her fingers over the embossed cover, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "How did you know I enjoy poetry?" she asked. Isaiah's smile was soft. "You were humming to yourself while working in the garden last week. I recognized the tune as the setting for one of Dickinson's poems that was published in the Atlantic Monthly. It seemed a reasonable guess." The fact that he had noticed such a detail, and gone to the trouble of ordering the book from what must have been a bookshop in Austin or San Antonio, spoke volumes about his character and perhaps his feelings. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to express the fullness of her gratitude. From that day forward, a new warmth entered their interactions. They began to share more personal stories during their daily rides between properties. Kathleen learned about Isaiah's childhood in Virginia, his difficult relationship with his father, and his traumatic experiences during the war. In turn, she told him about her life in Missouri, her brief courtship with Thomas, and their dreams for the Texas homestead. August brought no relief from the heat, but did bring an unexpected visitor to the Everett ranch. Kathleen was preparing dinner in the cookhouse when she heard the sound of an approaching carriage unusual, as most local travel was done on horseback. Curious, she stepped outside to see an elegant buggy pulling up to the main house. A woman emerged, fashionably dressed in a traveling costume that must have cost more than Kathleen earned in 3 months. She was perhaps 30, with carefully arranged blonde hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to privilege. Isaiah emerged from the barn, clearly surprised by the visitor. Kathleen watched as he approached the woman, who immediately held out her hands to him in a familiar gesture. They spoke briefly before he escorted her into the main house, his expression unreadable. Unsettled by the encounter, Kathleen returned to her cooking, though her thoughts were distracted. It wasn't until dinner, when Isaiah failed to appear at the cookhouse, that Hank offered an explanation. "That's Miss Caroline Reynolds," the foreman said, noting Kathleen's questioning glance toward the empty place at the table. "She and the boss were something of an item before he left for the war. Her family owns half of Williamson County, from what I hear." "I see," Kathleen replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the sudden hollowness in her chest. "Don't fret about dinner," Hank added kindly. "Boss probably took Miss Reynolds into town for a meal at the hotel. She never did care for ranch fare." Kathleen nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. More stew for the rest of you, then." That evening, for the first time since she had begun working at the ranch, Kathleen rode home alone. She told herself it was perfectly reasonable. Isaiah clearly had obligations to his guest, but the solitary journey felt longer and emptier than it should have. The next morning, Isaiah was not waiting when Kathleen arrived at the ranch. Instead, she found him in the kitchen of the main house preparing coffee. He looked tired, as though he hadn't slept well. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice carrying an unusual formality. "I apologize for not escorting you home yesterday evening. We have a guest, as you may have noticed." "Miss Reynolds," Kathleen supplied. "Yes, I saw her arrive." Isaiah ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "Caroline is the daughter of my uncle's closest friend. She's staying for a few days while traveling to San Antonio." Kathleen busied herself with gathering ingredients for breakfast, keeping her voice deliberately light. "How lovely to have an old friend visit." "The men mentioned you were acquainted before the war." Something flickered in Isaiah's eyes: regret, frustration. "Yes, though it was a long time ago. Different circumstances entirely." Before he could elaborate, the sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Caroline's approach. She entered the kitchen with the confidence of someone who had been there before, dressed in a morning gown of pale blue silk that made Kathleen acutely aware of her own simple work dress. "Good morning, Isaiah," Caroline said warmly, before turning her attention to Kathleen. "And you must be the housekeeper Hank mentioned. How convenient to have help so close at hand." The condescension in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. Kathleen straightened her shoulders, determined to maintain her dignity. "Miss Collins," she corrected politely. "I'm pleased to meet you, Miss Reynolds." Caroline's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Charmed, I'm sure. Isaiah, darling, I was hoping we might ride out to the North Pasture today. I'd love to see the improvements you mentioned last night." Isaiah glanced between the two women, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Of course, if that's what you'd like, but perhaps after breakfast." Caroline agreed graciously, though her eyes conveyed a clear message as they flickered toward Kathleen. She considered herself to have a prior claim on Isaiah's attention and time. The next 3 days were an exercise in patience for Kathleen. Caroline's presence disrupted the comfortable routine of the ranch, as Isaiah spent much of his time entertaining his guest. The woman made no secret of her interest in him, touching his arm when they spoke, referencing their shared past, and making plans that increasingly seemed to assume a shared future. For his part, Isaiah was unfailingly polite to Caroline, but maintained a certain reserve that Kathleen noted with private relief. Still, she couldn't help wondering if she had misinterpreted his attention to her. Perhaps he was simply kind to everyone, and the moments she had treasured as special were merely reflections of his generous character. On the evening before Caroline was set to depart, Isaiah finally managed to escort Kathleen home as usual. The ride was initially silent, heavy with unspoken thoughts. "I apologize for being scarce these past days," Isaiah said finally. "Caroline's visit was unexpected." "No apology necessary," Kathleen replied, keeping her eyes on the path ahead. "She seems quite fond of you." Isaiah sighed deeply. "Caroline and I have a complicated history. Before the war, her father hoped we might marry. It would have been a suitable match in terms of property and social standing." Kathleen's heart sank at his words, though she maintained a composed expression. "I see, and now?" "Now," he said, guiding his horse closer to hers, "I'm a different man than I was then. The war changed me, changed my priorities, my understanding of what matters in life." They rode in silence for another moment before he added, "Caroline doesn't seem to understand that. She speaks of parties in Austin and trips to San Antonio as if they should interest me, as if the young man who once courted her still exists." Relief flooded through Kathleen, though she tried not to show it. "People often see what they want to see," she offered carefully. Isaiah's gaze was intense as he looked at her. "And what do you see, Kathleen?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sent a thrill through her that she couldn't quite suppress. "I see a man who rebuilt a stranger's home with his own 2 hands," she said softly. "A man who treats his workers with respect and kindness. A man who notices when someone hums poetry while gardening." The smile that spread across his face transformed his features, erasing the tension of the past days. They completed the journey in comfortable silence, each lost in private thoughts, but somehow more connected than before. Caroline departed the next morning, leaving a palpable sense of relief in her wake. The ranch quickly returned to its normal routine, though something had shifted between Kathleen and Isaiah. Their conversations grew deeper, their silences more comfortable, their shared glances more meaningful. As August gave way to September, Kathleen's little cabin became a true home. The garden flourished, providing vegetables for her table and extras to share with the ranch. Bessie's milk was abundant, and the chickens provided more eggs than she could use. Isaiah continued to help with improvements during her days off, building shelves for her growing collection of books and a proper washstand for her bedroom. It was during one such day, as they sat on her small porch enjoying a brief rest and glasses of cool lemonade, that Isaiah finally spoke of what had been growing between them. "I never expected to find happiness again after the war," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. "I came to Texas to escape memories, not to build a future. My uncle's ranch was a refuge, nothing more." Kathleen remained silent, sensing he needed to continue without interruption. "When he died and left me everything, I felt a responsibility to maintain what he'd built, but my heart wasn't truly in it. I went through the motions, expanded the herd, improved the property, but it was just existence, not living." He turned to look at her then, his blue eyes intense. "And then a tornado tore through the county, and suddenly there you were, standing amid the ruins of everything you'd built, spine straight as a ramrod, determined to begin again no matter what it took." Kathleen felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I didn't feel very brave at the time," she admitted. "I was terrified, lost. But you didn't give up," he said, reaching across the space between them to take her hand. "You inspired me, Kathleen, made me realize I'd been hiding from life instead of embracing it." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "I know it hasn't been long since you lost Thomas, and I would never press you where your heart isn't ready to follow. But I want you to know that my feelings for you have grown far beyond those of an employer for his housekeeper, or even a friend for a friend." Kathleen's heart pounded in her chest. Part of her had known this conversation was coming, had perhaps even longed for it, but hearing the words spoken aloud made them real in a way that was both thrilling and frightening. "Isaiah," she began, uncertain how to express the tumult of her emotions. "I loved Thomas deeply. When he died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to feel anything like this again." Hope kindled in his eyes. "And now," she said carefully, "I find myself thinking of you throughout the day, looking forward to our rides together. Wondering what you'll think of a new recipe or how you'll respond to something I've read." She drew a steadying breath. "I feel guilty sometimes, as if caring for you somehow diminishes what I had with Thomas. But then I remember how he always said life was for living, not for regret. He wouldn't want me to be alone forever." Isaiah squeezed her hand gently. "I would never ask you to forget him, Kathleen. He was part of making you the woman you are, the woman I've come to care for deeply. And what of your responsibilities?" She asked, practical even in this moment of emotional revelation. "You're a prominent rancher. I'm a widow with a small homestead and a position as your housekeeper. People will talk." "Let them," Isaiah replied with unexpected fierceness. "I've spent too many years concerned with what others might think or say. The war taught me how quickly life can end, how foolish it is to waste it on others' expectations." He stood, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. Standing face to face on the small porch, with the Texas sun beginning to set behind the hills, he looked at her with such tenderness that Kathleen felt her reservations melting away. "I'm not asking for an answer today," he said softly. "Only that you consider a future where we face whatever comes together, rather than apart." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, respectful, affectionate, but restrained. It was the perfect gesture, acknowledging what had been said without demanding more than she was ready to give. That night, after Isaiah had returned to his ranch, Kathleen sat on her porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. She thought of Thomas, of the brief happiness they had shared, and of the dreams that had died with him. She thought of the tornado that had destroyed everything she owned, but somehow set her on a path to something new and unexpected. And she thought of Isaiah, his strength, his kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands as he helped rebuild her world piece by piece. By morning, her heart had found its answer. October brought cooler temperatures and a decision that would change both their lives. Kathleen arrived at the ranch one crisp Monday morning to find Isaiah waiting as usual, but with an uncharacteristic nervousness evident in his posture. "I'd like to show you something before you begin your duties," he said after helping her dismount. "If you don't mind, curious," Kathleen agreed, following him as he led the way not toward the main house but in the direction of the northern pasture. They walked in companionable silence for about a quarter-mile before cresting a small hill. Below them, nestled in a grove of oak trees, was a half-constructed building. The foundation was complete, and the frame was up, clearly showing the outline of what would be a modest but comfortable home. "What's this?" Kathleen asked, though a flutter of anticipation in her chest suggested she already knew. Isaiah took her hand, his expression a mixture of hope and vulnerability she had never seen before. "This is my answer to the question you asked about responsibilities and positions. This land is part of my property, but it's separate enough from the main ranch to be its own place, close enough to the main house for convenience, far enough for privacy." He guided her closer to the construction site. "I started building it after Caroline left. I wanted to show you that I've thought seriously about what a future together might look like. You value your independence. It's one of the many things I admire about you. This would be our home, not the ranch house with all its history and associations." Kathleen was deeply moved by the gesture. He had understood her concerns without her having to elaborate, had found a solution that respected who she was while still creating space for who they might become together. "It's beautiful," she said softly, imagining the finished home with windows overlooking the rolling hills, perhaps a garden similar to the one she had worked so hard to restore at her cabin. "There's more," Isaiah said, a hint of nervousness returning to his voice. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had this made in Austin." Inside was a ring unlike any Kathleen had seen before, Rather than a traditional diamond, it featured a small but perfect sapphire surrounded by tiny pearls. The blue reminded me of the wildflowers that were starting to bloom when we first met, Isaiah explained. And pearls symbolize tears transformed into something beautiful like what you've done with your life after so much loss. He took a deep breath. Kathleen Collins, I love you. I love your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love the way you've brought life back to my ranch and to my heart. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Tears welled in Kathleen's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Isaiah Everett. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand alone. When he drew her into his arms, their first real kiss was everything Kathleen had dreamed it might be, tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Johnson City and the surrounding area. Most reactions were positive, with many noting that it seemed a natural outcome of the circumstances that had brought them together. A few raised eyebrows at the relatively short time since Thomas's passing, but even those critics couldn't deny the genuine affection evident between Kathleen and Isaiah. They decided on a December wedding, giving them time to complete the new house and make proper arrangements. Kathleen continued her work as housekeeper during this period, though everyone understood the position was temporary. She and Isaiah began planning how the ranch would operate with her as his wife rather than his employee. I was thinking William's wife might take on some of the cooking duties, Isaiah suggested one evening as they reviewed household matters. She's mentioned wanting to earn extra money, and she's known for her skills in the kitchen. Kathleen nodded thoughtfully. That would work well. And perhaps Miguel's daughter could help with cleaning the main house a few days a week. She's 16 now, old enough for the responsibility. Such practical discussions were interspersed with more personal ones about their future together. Isaiah made it clear that Kathleen's homestead would remain hers, a security she appreciated even as she prepared to join her life with his. We could use it as a place for guests, she suggested. Or perhaps in time, if we're blessed with children, it could be a legacy for one of them. The mention of children brought a tender expression to Isaiah's face. I would like that, he admitted. A family, something I'd given up hoping for before I met you. November saw the completion of their new home, a charming structure of limestone and timber with a wide porch reminiscent of the one Isaiah had helped build for Kathleen's cabin. Together they selected furniture, combining pieces from the main ranch house with new items ordered from catalogs or purchased in Austin during a special trip. As their wedding day approached, Kathleen found herself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. If the tornado hadn't destroyed her home, she might never have met Isaiah, or at least not come to know him as she did now. What had seemed like the worst day of her life had ultimately led to this unexpected happiness. December 12, 1875, dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for a winter wedding. The ceremony was held in the Methodist Church in Johnson City, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs and red berries for the Christmas season. Kathleen wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with Mary Beth Wilson's fine stitching evident in every seam. Her auburn hair was arranged in an intricate knot adorned with small white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of winter roses cultivated specially in the hotel greenhouse. Isaiah waited at the altar, more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new black suit and crisp white shirt. His expression, as she walked down the aisle on Hank's arm, the foreman having volunteered to give her away, was one of such pure joy that Kathleen felt her heart might burst from happiness. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Reverend Parker speaking eloquently about new beginnings and the blessings that can emerge from life's greatest challenges. When Isaiah placed a simple gold band alongside the engagement ring on Kathleen's finger, his hands were steady but his eyes shone with unshed tears. I promise to love and cherish you all the days of my life, he vowed, his voice carrying clearly through the church. To build with you a home filled with warmth and laughter, to stand beside you in good times and bad, and to thank God every day for the tornado that brought you into my life." There was a ripple of appreciative laughter at this last part, an acknowledgement of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. Kathleen's own vows were similarly heartfelt, expressing her gratitude for second chances and the courage to embrace love again. The celebration afterward was held at the Everett Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and a dance floor created on the packed earth near the barn. Lanterns hung from trees provided golden light as darkness fell, and a local fiddler led a small band in lively tunes that kept the dancing going well into the evening. As the newlyweds prepared to depart for their new home, Hank stepped forward with a gift from the ranch hands, a beautifully crafted wooden sign reading Everett Homestead, designed to hang at the entrance to their property. "We figured every new beginning deserves a proper name," the foreman explained gruffly, clearly emotional though trying to hide it. "And this place is as much yours now, Miss Kathleen, Mrs. Everett, that is as it is the boss's." Tears of gratitude filled Kathleen's eyes as she embraced the old cowboy. "Thank you, Hank, for everything." Their first night in their new home was everything Kathleen had dreamed it might be: tender, passionate, a perfect union of two souls who had found each other against all odds. As she lay in Isaiah's arms afterward, watching the moonlight filter through the curtains they had selected together, she felt a sense of completion she had never known before. "Happy," Isaiah murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Beyond words," she replied honestly. "If someone had told me on the day of the tornado that it would lead to this, I would never have believed them." He chuckled, his chest rumbling pleasantly beneath her cheek. "God works in mysterious ways, my love. Sometimes the storms in our lives clear the way for something better than we could have imagined." The months that followed were filled with the joys and occasional challenges of married life. Kathleen took to her role as the wife of a prominent rancher with natural grace, hosting dinners for neighboring landowners, managing the household accounts, and gradually implementing improvements that made the Everett Ranch even more profitable. Isaiah, for his part, flourished with Kathleen by his side. The lingering shadows of war that had sometimes darkened his expression seemed to fade as they built their life together. He expanded the ranch's operations, experimenting with new breeding techniques for the cattle, and establishing a reputation for fair dealing that brought business from throughout the region. They maintained the little cabin on Kathleen's original homestead, visiting occasionally to tend the garden she had worked so hard to restore. It became a sort of retreat for them, a place to reconnect with the beginning of their story when the demands of the ranch became overwhelming. In late summer of 1876, as the first anniversary of the tornado approached, Kathleen shared news that brought Isaiah to his knees with joy. They were expecting their first child. The baby, a healthy boy they named Thomas Isaiah Everett, was born in February 1877, bringing a new dimension of happiness to their already blessed life. As Kathleen nursed their son in the nursery Isaiah had added to their home, she often thought about the strange journey that had led her to this moment. The tornado that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been a beginning. From the wreckage of her old life, something beautiful had emerged, a love story written not in the stars, but in the rebuilding of what had been broken. Isaiah found her there one evening, gazing out the window at the Texas sunset with their son sleeping peacefully in her arms. He wrapped his arms around them both, his chin resting gently on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" he asked softly, careful not to wake the baby. Kathleen leaned back against his solid strength, grateful as always for his presence. "I was thinking about how things can change in an instant, how a single day, a single event can alter the entire course of a life." He nodded, understanding immediately what she meant. "The tornado." "Yes," she agreed. "It destroyed everything I had. But then you came along and rebuilt not just my home, but my hope, my heart." Isaiah turned her gently to face him, their son cradled between them. "And you rebuilt mine, Kathleen. Never forget that. We rebuilt each other." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kathleen Everett knew that while the path had been unexpected, and at times painful, she wouldn't change a single step that had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life they had created together from the aftermath of destruction. In the years that followed, the Everett family continued to thrive. Thomas was joined by a sister, Emma Grace, in 1879, and another brother, William James, in 1881. The ranch prospered under Isaiah and Kathleen's joint management, becoming one of the most respected operations in the county. They never forgot how they began, though, and each year on the anniversary of the tornado, they made a point of helping others in the community who had fallen on hard times. Whether it was rebuilding a barn destroyed by fire, providing food for a family struggling after illness, or offering employment to those in need, the Everetts became known for their generosity and compassion. The small cabin on Kathleen's original homestead remained standing, a testament to the power of community and the strength that can emerge from devastation. Eventually, it became Thomas's first home when he married at 21, a place to establish himself before taking on greater responsibilities at the main ranch. And on quiet evenings, when the children were grown and the day's work was done, Isaiah and Kathleen would often sit on the porch of their home, hands intertwined, watching the Texas sunset and marveling at how the worst day of her life had ultimately led to their greatest happiness, a love born from destruction and built, like their home, with patience, dedication, and their own two hands.